Hello and welcome to the Inner Sense channel. We have a real treat today for anyone who is interested in improving how they feel through movement. I'm joined by science writer Caroline Williams, who specialises in neuroscience and health-related topics. And recently, Caroline wrote an excellent article in the New Scientist magazine on interoception, which is what this channel is all about. So today, Caroline and I talk about the new way that scientists are thinking of the body and its relationship to the mind. And Caroline shares her thoughts on how we can use movement as a tool to help direct how we think and feel. As Caroline explains in her book, it's not always a case of doing more exercise, but instead it's about breaking up periods of sitting. I love how Caroline communicates. For example, she uses the idea that rather than viewing our brains as kind of a master commander for our bodies, instead we can think of our brains as the host of a chat room where the body has an important part in this conversation. So I hope you enjoy this interview, and please remember to subscribe to the Inner Sense channel for more information about interoception and tools to help make sense of your inner world. Thank you. Hi, so morning, Caroline. How are you doing?
Morning, very well, thanks. And you?
Yeah, very good, thank you. And really pleased that you're joining me today on the Inner Sense channel. I read your book, Move, which we'll talk about, and also more recently, the article on interoception, which is what this channel is all about. But before we move into that, can you please start by sharing a little bit about your background and how you ended up as a science writer specializing in neuroscience and health-related topics?
Absolutely, yes. So, I mean, it's kind of quite a long story, really. If you can go back far enough, when I first went to university, I went to study to be a PE teacher, which was not because I was one of the kids at school that was always in the teams and was really into sport and all that kind of thing. In fact, I think if you asked my PE teachers back then, if you told them I was applying for PE teaching, they'd be like, "What, seriously? With a little one, Caroline?" Nah. But my thought process at the time, which I still stand by actually, was I want to do something where I'm not sitting around in an office, just miserable, typing away, not moving, not getting any fresh air and exercise. And I want something where I can be active. But I was also interested in the science. So my original plan was to do a biology degree with PE on the side. It turns out you couldn't study it that way at the time. So I did it the other way around with PE teaching and biology on the side. So after a year of that, it was a great fun year. But it's I sort of realized that maybe because it's largely then it was about team sports, PE. And it wasn't really my thing. And I was more interested in the biology. So I sort of put that to one side and went to do a straight biology degree. So, but I've still always been really active just throughout my whole life. I just haven't done it sort of as a job. And then I sort of, through the biology, I realized at some point that I was one of those weird people who likes sitting in the library reading about stuff and likes writing essays about stuff. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to have a job where you did that for a living? And it turned out that science journalism was a thing. So I made it my aim to get into science journalism, got there sort of in a roundabout kind of a way. And then I became fascinated by the way the mind works. And that for most of my career has been looking at the brain, how the brain works, how to get the best out of these amazing bits of mush that we have in our heads, and how to get over the glitches, the lack of focus, the anxiety, the stress, all these things that seem to come as part of the package with our brains. And then it sort of occurred to me that my brain works best when my body is moving. And I thought, I wonder if there's anything in that, and started looking into it. And it turned out there was just huge amounts of research, most of which hadn't really been talked about much in the public sphere. And so that's why I ended up going down the route of Move, the idea of using your body as a tool to direct the way you think and feel. And that's how I ended up here. It's a very long story, sorry.
No, that's great. And it is nice to hear that coming full circle and hear how you've kind of crafted your direction and really been assertive with your career by the sounds of it, and your lifestyle, which I hope to hear a little bit about too, in terms of movement. So Before we go into the topics around move, can you share a little bit about or an example of how what you've learned whilst researching this book has helped you in your own life? Maybe even, what a typical day's movement regime is like for you.
Yeah, well, I partly deliberately have got a very big, boisterous dog. He's a collie crossed with a New Zealand sheepdog, which is basically they took already high maintenance dogs to New Zealand and thought, we need bigger ones that can run up and down mountains. That's what we need. He may burst through that door at some point. It's quite his speciality. But so he needs a lot of exercise. So at least, 5-mile walks, usually most days. So we get up, drop my boy off for school at the station, early doors, and then we go out for a long walk. I'm lucky enough to live in the Surrey countryside, so there's loads of gorgeous places to walk. So I do that, get back. Then there is, a bit of sitting involved in my work, but I try and break it up. So one of the things that's come out of Move is that it's a sedentariness that's the problem. It's not so much a question of trying to get more exercise into your day, because the research suggests that the declines we see in sort of brain function over long periods of time correlate with the amount of time spent sedentary, regardless of whether you do high intensity exercise. So it's not necessarily about thinking, I should do 2 HIIT sessions a day. I should go out for a walk in the morning and a run in the afternoon. It's not about doing more exercise. It's about breaking up the sitting. And so what I tend to do is I do have an office, but I sort of sit there for a bit and then I get bored of that and I come and I'm downstairs now. So I come and sit on the floor for a bit. I might do a deep squat and put my laptop on a chair and do that until my knees are killing me, sit on the floor in a straddle, so I sort of mix it up and move around. And I don't feel guilty about stopping and going out for a walk break. That's one thing. Because I think even though I've worked for myself for 20 odd years, there's still a bit of your brain that's saying, don't skive off and go for a walk in the middle of the day. But just realizing that, so some of the research I covered in the book was about creativity and how when you're moving at a pace that's easy for you, it sort of turns down activity in the frontal bits of the brain temporarily, which is behind your forehead. And that has been shown in experiments where you artificially turn it down temporarily, that makes the brain think broader, more creatively, puts ideas together without shutting them down and going for the obvious. And so actually going for a walk is part of the creative process, or a cycle or a run or whatever you can do that just lets your mind wander. That does count as work. So I think one of the other main things, apart from legitimizing my fidgeting and moving around the house, is that going for a walk is work. Don't feel guilty about it. So
that's where the thoughts consolidate or the creativity comes through.
Yeah.
So it can be good. The image coming to my mind there of actors learning their lines whilst pacing up and down. So there's these little hints that maybe we've known this all along, but this idea of having to be sat in front of a desk in a sort of 9 to 5 way is you feel guilty. Well, I know I do. I sometimes feel guilty if I don't do that.
It's crazy.
Power through the food coma or something like that at mid-afternoon.
Yes, exactly. And people have known about it. It's no real secret that walking and thinking are connected. So some of the biggest thinkers of history. So Charles Darwin came back from the voyages of the Beagle, and it took him about 5 years before he actually managed to get all these ideas and all these things he'd seen and managed to put them into some kind of order. And part of his process was when he got back, and I partly love the fact that he came back and he was living in London and he had young children in the house, and it was just like, I couldn't hear himself think. So he moved to the countryside, and the first thing he did when he got there is build a walking path that's like 1/4 of a mile around his grounds. So you can go there now. It's called Down House. It's in Kent, and you can walk along. It's along the side of a nice sloping meadow, and then it loops back round through the woodland. And Darwin would walk round that path 4 or 5 times every day, and he called it his thinking path. And that's where he finally got the headspace to put all these little bits of ideas and observations that he'd made and managed to sort of coalesce them into something that we now know is the theory of evolution. So he knew that a long time ago. He would totally let his mind wander. There's a story that he used to pile up stones at the beginning of his circuit. So if he wanted to do 4 circuits, he'd put 4 stones up. And as he went round, he would knock one off with his walking stick. And the bit I particularly love is that his children apparently would come along and sort of giggle and put an extra stone on to confuse him, because he'd be away with the fairies, just thinking as he walked. So I guess kids haven't changed. But yeah, that idea I think we've forgotten. We think that you have to sit still and that's where the best thinking happens. And it doesn't. So I think we need to change that.
Yeah, and that's what I loved about your book. When I first saw the title, I thought it was an exercise book, which it's promoting exercise, but actually you've got a bigger message or a statement, and maybe we'll hear a little bit about the manifesto in a while. But throughout the book, you get across this idea that scientists are changing the way that they think about the relationship between the body and mind. Can you explain what the old view of the brain's role was and what the new view that's emerging, especially in relation to how the body and the brain talk to each other?
Yeah, so the kind of the dominant view, which I think a lot of people have, and I definitely did for a long time, was that the brain is the driver of behavior, and the brain tells the body what to do and the body enacts it, and that the brain is very much the boss. Whereas now it's slightly changing. Obviously, the brain is very important. No one's saying that, oh, well, your body's more important than the brain. But now that there's a slight shift in focus, that inputs from the body affect the way we think and feel and drive behavior. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on below the neck that talks to the brain. It's a two-way conversation. And the new view is sort of like the brain, rather than being the boss that dictates what goes on, it's sort of the host of a chat room where all the information comes in and everyone has their say, and then, something happens and then the action happens. And sometimes the brain makes the decisions, and sometimes this stuff sort of just, goes along. But it's a back and forth that goes on. And the important thing where movement's concerned is that you can use movement to sort of change some of these messages that are going to the brain, and that can the kind of conversation changes, the inputs change, and then that sort of sets everything off on a slightly different path. So these interoceptive messages that are coming from the body, so everything from the heart rate to the hormones in your blood, the stress hormones and other kinds of hormones, everything, sensations of hunger, all this feeds into the way that we think and feel, and we can do something about a lot of those things. So from sort of reading between the lines of what you're saying there, so it's not just about doing more exercise. We can tune or tailor or pick different flavors of exercise to get different outcomes, cognitive outcomes, if we want to. Is that right? Absolutely, yeah. So some of these, this great thing about being human, because I guess these pathways exist in all kinds of creatures, but we have the ability to think about what's happening and choose to make these changes. So for example, the research, when I start talking about this, everyone sits up, but the research to do with the core and how that relates to the stress response is really, really surprised me and was really, really interesting. Because so this researcher called Peter Strick, he has traced the neural pathways, so basically the wiring diagram from the adrenal glands, which pump out stress hormones, and they're on the kidneys, and they obviously connect to the brain. And by tracing these connections, he found out that they turn up in the motor cortex, which is the bit that does voluntary movement, which sits like an Alice band over the top of your head. And the bit where it turns up is, so the motor cortex is to do with movement, but the part of that brain area is to do with movements of the core and the trunk area. So this link between the stress system and voluntary movements of the core could be really important for stress. Because so we've known from psychology experiments for a while that how you posture does affect how you feel, and that goes back way through animals as well. If you see a chimp that's lost a fight, they'll be slumped, but you can reverse engineer that and think, why am I sitting like this? I can engage my core. And maybe that's an alternative way to manage stress that isn't what the current brain-centric view is. just think about it in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Calm down, retrain your thoughts. There's another way that I think, to me, it makes more sense. It'd be more effective to use your body to feel differently rather than trying to talk yourself down all the time.
That's it. And, and then you can start to see, or it starts to, when we have a mechanism for how something like posture can directly influence or change the function of your mind or your brain, then it starts to make sense why yoga or posture, things where we alter our posture, help people. We've had Robert Schlepp on this channel, who studies fascia. And,
yes, I'm trying to get hold of him right now. I'm writing about
really?
fascia. Yeah.
If you do, he's brilliant. He's so enthusiastic and an excellent character. But yeah, he's done some really interesting stuff as well on, a perception of auditory input on tension in your lower back, and then so he's just, if you do get hold of him, he's an expert and got so much wisdom.
Fascinating.
Sorry.
So I was going to say, there's two ways that you can use the body to kind of change these inputs as well. So you can do it in the moment by changing your posture, but also in the long term. So there's studies showing that increasing physical strength, it changes the sort of the unconscious messages that go from your muscles and your tendons and your bones and everything, that sort of informing your brain and your mind how capable you are in the world. And so there's a really good body of research going back, to the 80s that shows increasing people's physical strength increases self-esteem, decreases anxiety, can help with depression. And this measurement that psychologists call global self-efficacy, which is just this sensation, this feeling that you can handle life, increases when people are more physically strong. So you can change it for the long term by, changing the messages your body is sending. So it is quite important, I think. Just
by feeling more able. Physically able makes you feel more sort of able as a human being to be human.
Exactly, in a way that you can't really put your finger on. So it's not like you have to retrain your brain to think differently. You just have this underlying sense. And I spoke to one scientist who works in interoception, and he's also does rock climbing. And he said to me, it's you start off and you're not really sure whether you can make it to the top of the wall. But after a while, you get the strength and your body knows it can do it, and your body knows where it's going. And overall, that sort of feeds into a sense of being a bit more capable in areas of life that have nothing to do with getting up a wall. You just feel a bit more like you can handle stuff. And there's research that backs that up as well. So it's really, really important.
So this big idea that thoughts are not our only route to feelings, do you find it easy to get that across to people, maybe to a stranger who doesn't know you're a science writer?
Well, it's funny because I spend a lot of time walking my dog, and you spend a lot of time chatting to people who are also walking their dogs. And it kind of depends how active the person is. But people who tend to go out on long walks with their dogs totally get it, and they say, well, if I'm feeling upset or down, or, I go for a walk, sorts me out. People who are into wild swimming say this is the only time I can shut off and just let my mind wander and feel at one with the world. So people who do exercise or are active sort of get it and are surprised and usually quite happy that there's some science to back it up, because I think, if you're an active person, you get that it makes you feel better, and that's what keeps you going back for more. I think the challenge is for people who don't have never really grown up being active, and exercise equals pain, equals embarrassment, equals getting hot and sweaty and having to change your shoes. That's the challenge, I think, in getting people to find something that they really love doing, whether it's exercise or whether it's something that they just love doing, whether it's dancing around your kitchen. I'm a big kitchen dancer. Makes you feel better about life if you've had a bad day. But so trying to find something that people love, and then they sort of get it for themselves almost. So I guess that's the challenge. And that's partly, I know we're going to talk about, my manifesto sort of later on, but it's trying to get as early as possible in people's lives this thing that they love doing. And then it doesn't become a chore. It's not a thing it's not a stick you need to beat yourself with because you haven't done it. It just sort of is part of your life, and it enhances your life. And once it starts enhancing your life, then it's a no-brainer.
And what you just said about that dancing around the kitchen, I can imagine, sometimes that happens spontaneously, doesn't it? We hear a tune, and then we dance, and then, you may feel better, but not register that it was necessarily the movement. You might have just thought it was the music, or even just carry on and not even notice you feel better. So what the opportunity I hear from you is that if we have this knowledge of the power of movement, and then test it with something we love, and then aim to sort of almost log that or record that as a bit of evidence.
Yeah.
And then hopefully that would build over time as well.
Yeah. And it's a lot of it is noticing as well, sort of tuning in. This comes back to interoception as well, tuning into what your body needs at the moment. So sometimes now I will, get a bit in the afternoon. I can't be bothered to do anything. Well, what do I need to do? Do I need to do, am I stressed? If I'm het up and stressed, then maybe I'll do some yoga or a long ponderous walk. If I'm just lethargic and I'm bored and I need to get some energy, then I might jump around the kitchen or go for a really brisk walk or a bike ride or something that gets things. So it's kind of working out what your mind needs and how you can use your body to achieve that. And sort of it's tuning in really, and realizing that you have these tools available and then choosing the right one for the job.
So that's kind of self-administered exercise tonics, we could say. I saw in the book you mentioned about different therapies that have a body focus to them. Have you tried? Well, was it the 5 rhythms? I think you tried, which was interesting.
Yeah, it was very interesting, and I've actually never been back, despite it really affected me at the time. So okay. I mean, the trouble with dance, I mean, it is a very powerful thing. It's very much fundamental to human bonding and society. Every culture from way back when we were painting on walls has had dance in some way or another. But it's kind of embarrassing, and lots of people don't do it when they're an adult. So I took myself off to this 5 rhythms class. I refused anyone who wanted to come with me. I was like, no, I'm absolutely doing this on my own. And it was just really embarrassing. But there was a point in the class where it stopped being about sort of just expressing your emotions through, floating around, and started just being about jumping around to a beat. And that got me. And it kind of, there was definitely a point at which I realized I wasn't moving my body, and my body was moving me, and my mind was just along for the ride. And I was on a high for about 2 days afterwards, and it was just incredible. So yeah, I definitely learned something from that, but there's a barrier to get across to go back and do that again. Yeah. So I try to do it in the privacy of my own home now, if I can sure do that. Yoga has been one of my things for years. And, that was one of the things that got me interested in this whole area. It's like, well, I feel so much calmer and more focused, and like I can cope with stuff. What's that about? Is it the strength I'm getting? Is it the breathing? Is it the stretching? And, it turns out all of those things for different reasons. So that's sort of my therapy.
Go-to.
That would be my go-to. Yeah. That and walking.
Lovely. On the topic of music again, so there were some studies you mentioned in the book about kind of rhythm and synchronization. So, of course, music is one way to get some rhythm in our life. But this idea of synchronization, can you explain what has that got to do with movement? Yeah,
so that was really a really interesting bit of research. So there's a neuroscientist who put forward this idea that what happens when we're moving in synchrony with other people is that we have this sense called proprioception, which is like our innate sense of where our body is in space. So, we don't always need to look to know where our body is and where it begins and ends. We know that. We have that sensation. And when we're moving, we have this sense of where our body is in space. And when we're moving in synchrony with other people, we're also getting the information from their body movements coming in through our senses. And the brain gets a little bit confused at this point about where my body ends and where your body starts, and the lines get a little bit blurred. And so the idea is that this helps us feel bonded together, as if we're almost as one, which kind of chimes with one of the ideas about why dance evolved in the first place. It was a social glue to bond people together. When we were hunter-gatherers, we needed each other because humans are quite puny creatures. If you want to bring down a big beast, you need to work together. You need to care about each other. And so this was a social glue that bonded humans to other humans, and it still works today. And so there's been experiments right from toddlers that if you bounce a toddler on your knee in time to music, and then you put them down and then you sort of pretend to drop something, they're far more likely to pick it up and give it back to you if you've bounced them in time, in synchrony with music, than if you bounce them all over the place. And the similar experiments have been done with adults as well. If they're tapping in unison with each other, and then they do play a gambling game where they can either kind of stuff things up for each other or help each other, they work better together when they've been moving in synchrony. So there's something about it that makes us feel bonded and makes us care about each other more, which I think is really powerful, because, you know, in this society that we're in, where everyone's arguing and polarized, and, you know, just a bit of moving in synchrony could solve a lot of ills if only we could make that happen somehow.
I love that idea. And these ideas of being able to self-regulate, but also co-regulate. And so it's, you know, we don't always have to just be, our own medics and sort ourselves out and bring ourselves down if we're overstressed. If we're stressed, we can do that in a group setting or in a therapeutic setting. And there is this evidence appearing that there's a kind of a real measurable synchrony type effect. It's really exciting.
Yeah, there's some interesting studies about people dancing together. So now we've got the technology to use EEG, which is, you know, electrodes on the outside of the brain. Well, that for a long time, that's been, you've had to be wired physically into something. Well, now the technology is coming through where you can sort of carry the stuff in the backpack, and it can all, it can be done while people are moving. And so there's some really interesting studies where people are dancing together and seeing what happens to their brainwaves, and it seems that they synchronize together, and people start. Yeah, which is really powerful. And one of the neuroscientists I spoke to is working on what he calls the groove enhancement machine, which is like a set of drum pads that are linked together, and people, tap and drum together. And then he does these experiments about whether they work together better. And he calls it the groove enhancement machine. And he says, you know, you could maybe think of, you know, the global climate conferences or something. You've got people in a room, you need these leaders to work together, get them all grooving together first. And maybe that could make agreement easier to come by. I love that idea. Whether it would ever happen, I don't know, but I love the idea of them all grooving away and then making the world a better place.
Well, yeah, coming into agreement is, as you said, with things being so polarized, the process of coming into agreement is it could be really useful. I had a woman called, she's a professor of in politics in Edinburgh, Laura Cram, on this channel, but she's also a yoga teacher in her time outside of the university, and she specializes in interoception yoga. But she was sort of saying how there's some interesting research on these subconscious things that affect people's, you know, visceral reactions when they walk into a room. Maybe it's something like, you know, the flags of another country in front of them. So, you know, that affects their decision making. Whereas if you've got, you know, if that's going to polarize people, can you have something like this? What was it called? Groove tuner?
Groove enhancement machine.
Groove enhancement machine. So something to kind of help people feel a little bit more aligned rather than threatened could be really useful. Yeah,
I mean, something that takes it back to we're all humans and we want to improve things. I mean, just as simple as that. And the other thing I love about this sort of getting in the groove is that you can use it even if you're alone. So the research suggests that when the same guy, actually, Peter Janata is his name, that if you're moving in time to music, even if there's nobody else in the room, you're moving to the movements of other people making those noises. So he says it's like being invited to join in with the band. So so you still feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself, even if you're completely on your own. And I think, you know, loneliness is a big problem now in all age groups, even though we're more connected than we've ever been. You know, the idea that we can connect to society just through moving by ourselves, or ideally with other people as well, is something that could be really powerful, I think.
I'll have to look him up. Peter, what was his surname?
Janata, Janata. He's great. He's got big curly hair and a goatee beard. He looks like he's studying the groove, the neuroscience of the groove. He's great.
Great. I'll look him up. I'd like to come on to your movement manifesto in a few minutes' time. But first of all, I love the Sea Squirt story so much. So could you briefly please explain what the story of the Sea Squirt is, and how it puts into question the importance of our brain compared to a body?
Yeah, so this, so I can't claim that the Sea Squirt example is my idea. It's a very distinguished neuroscientist called Rodolfo Linas, and he made the point that, we think that brains are there for thinking, but if you look in an evolutionary context, when brains came along in evolution, that doesn't make sense. He argues that brains are there to inform movements through the world, and so the Sea Squirt is an example of when in evolution, nature was experimenting with whether brains were worth the effort, because they take a lot of energy to run. They're quite complicated bits of kit to build. So the Sea Squirt, when it's a larva, it's like a little tadpole, and it swims around the ocean, and its job is to find somewhere to attach and where it can grow up and spend the rest of its life sort of filter feeding. And when it's swimming around the ocean, it has a very basic brain, and it uses this to coordinate the movements. So the senses, so, where is safe, going towards things that are rewarding, and going away from things that are dangerous, and coordinate the movements of its tail. And once it's found a spot on the seabed that fits the bill, it glues itself on by its head. And one of the first things it does is reabsorbs almost its entire nervous system, so that it doesn't have a brain anymore. And Linas made the point that, moving is too dangerous to attempt without a plan, so you need a brain. When you're attached, you're not moving anymore, then the investment in energy just isn't worth it. So you put the whole lot in the recycling, use the energy for something else, and then it never makes a decision ever again. It just sits there sucking water in one tube and blowing it out the other. And so the wider point of all this is that, our brains are there to inform our movements in the world, to get towards things that are likely to improve our survival, and away from things that are likely to threaten our survival. And the same is true throughout the whole of evolution. And so, and investment in our brains is very much a use it or lose it situation. So not quite as dramatic as the Sea Squirt. We're not going to just completely reabsorb our brains if we spend too much time on the sofa. But we do know that when we exercise, when we're active, the brain invests in capacity. It boosts memory, puts new neurons in, more blood vessels, more connections. Everything just works better. And if we're not physically active, then that starts to sort of be broken down a little bit. So if we want to keep our brains in top condition, movement is just non-negotiable.
And I almost get this impression of, children come into the world with this awe and wonder, and they just want to explore, and they provide themselves with all this stimulation, which it encourages the brain to blossom. Whereas whether it's through ill health or just through lack of stimulation, or our world getting smaller in some way, as you get older, there's this risk that we'll just lose out on all that stimulation, but unnecessarily, by the sounds of it. If we just keep on kind of providing new bits of information, then the brain will stay responsive.
Yeah, and it's also tied to a point in our evolution as well, in the evolution of humans, whereby we were sort of started hunting gathering. So we weren't like other apes that sort of sat around munching on fruit. We sort of started having to roam further. And at this point in our evolution, we needed to be able to move well over long distances, to walk a lot, run a bit, be strong enough to dig and all that kind of thing. But we also needed to think, to work together, to cooperate, to bring down game, to remember the way home. And so hunting and gathering isn't for dummies. It's skilled cognitive work. And so at that point in our evolution, there's this theory, the adaptive capacity model, that links together the ability to move and the increasing architecture, or the maintenance of architecture of the brain. And in humans in particular, because our brains are so expensive to run, and because we're built to move and hunt and gather, this is particularly important. And so that's why, so we've known for a long time that exercise is really good for the brain. This sort of suggests why, because our physiology and of our bodies and our brains are linked. Surprise, surprise, you know, and so we've basically got the same bodies and brains we had when we were hunter-gatherers. And so movement for us, if we want our brains to work at full capacity, is non-negotiable. And so I'm not talking about making yourself a genius by moving more. It's just staying at the top of where you can be, given your genetics and the cards life has dealt you.
Because I guess it could be argued that we'll adapt to whatever our environment becomes. So if we want to evolve into a brain in a jar connected to the internet, then that'll be fine. It'll happen. But
well, there's an argument that a brain in a jar wouldn't really be able to learn. You know, it'd have to learn the stuff to start with. Without, if you're thinking of embodied cognition, then could the brain learn on its own? I don't know. I have my doubts whether it would.
Not if it's not getting any useful input, then no.
A lot of it would not be needed anymore.
No. Well, I'm convinced anyway that movement is a good thing to carry on doing. So your book Move concluded with the Movement Manifesto. Mm-hmm. And what I liked was how it was structured for people of all ages. So it's, accessible for people. Can you sort of explain how you structured the Movement Manifesto and, how it could be used by people, maybe for organizations or businesses?
Well, I started it really with children, with the young, start them young, because my worry is that it's very possible still to go through school and come out the other end and think that physical activity is not your thing. And then not have that moment where you think, oh, I do this and I feel really good. Perhaps I'll keep that going in my life. I know my son is 12 and he has friends that just aren't physical. And, you take them for a walk and within minutes they're like, oh, I need to go home. So they never kind of get that. So I think we need to work a lot better at bringing different types of movement into schools and into other places where young people hang out so that they have this moment themselves where they fall in love with it and realize that they feel better when they do it. And whether that's, parkour or, martial arts or circus skills or dance or, whatever it is that they don't react to, it might just be, bike jumps. I don't know, anything. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter. But finding ways for kids to find the movement that's going to work for them, and then they'll carry it on in their lives, and then it's job done really, because they'll throughout their whole lives they'll have this tool at their disposal. And also teaching them. So mindfulness has started to go into schools now. So kids do meditation sessions, but adding a movement aspect to that, I think would really supercharge it. And also for some people, like for me, meditation doesn't really do the do because I'm not really great at sitting still, but moving meditation, whether that's swimming, whether it's yoga, Tai Chi, whatever it is, then getting people to realize that you can change your mindset by specifically moving in certain ways, I think is really important to get into the kids. And also managing their emotions, tuning into their emotions through recognizing them in their body. How does anger feel in your body? And learning to regulate that using movement, I think would be really, really important and good for children to set them on the right path.
And I think it was in your manifesto, you mentioned the opportunities for making it playful with imagination, so pretending to be animals and so on. And, there's so many ways that can be done.
Absolutely. Yeah. Breathe, be a snail. Can you breathe into the snail's shell? Things like that for younger children. And then for older children, you can do it in terms of teaching them. So Terry Kvasnik, who I interviewed, who's fantastic stuntman, acrobat, performer, martial artist. He does things with kids and he teaches them resilience through teaching them, as far as they're concerned, they're learning how to do backflips and tumbles and all kinds of really cool stuff. But actually what he's teaching them is when you feel scared, here's how you calm down and focus. And then here's how you put your mind into your legs and send them over your head, and so it's kind of all these skills. And when you do it wrong, here's how you pick yourself up and move on. So, resilience comes into it. And there's an awful lot that could be done. And there's some really good stuff that is already happening. In schools, there's the Daily Mile, which is started off by Elaine Wiley, who's a I think she does it full time now, but she was a headmistress of a school in Scotland. She noticed that children were not active. And she started off during some point in the day, the teacher could decide, right, everyone, pencils down, don't change your shoes, no, nothing, just go out, run around for, one lap of the playground, takes about 15 minutes, is about a mile. And since then, so it was done initially to improve fitness, but since then there have been studies done of it, and it's improved kids' focus, it's improved their grades, it's improved their mental health, as well as their physical fitness. So the kids love it. I went to a festival and was talking about this, and a little girl put her hand up saying, I do that. And I said, do you love it? Oh my God, it's brilliant. She absolutely loves it. So making it fun and getting them out of the classroom and moving is definitely a big thing.
Well, I'm signed up to the manifesto.
Yeah, I mean, the other two bits of it are mental health. So there's a lot of good stuff in mental health, prescribing activity, whether it's walking or, there you go, as predicted. Oh no, sorry, it wasn't the dog at all, somebody else. I was going to blame the dog. So in mental health, we sort of pay a lot of lip service to adding on exercise as a way of getting people to feel better, but properly prescribing strength training for anxiety, being outside, walking groups, this kind of thing is really, really important to take seriously, not as a way of replacing other treatments, but as an add-on that could really, really improve people's lives and give them tools that they can use themselves from there on in. And then the final group is the elderly. So get moving in any way possible for as long as possible, giving people in sort of care facilities ways of, so Terry Kvasnik, who I talked about, does dance with older people, seated dance. He's even done seated break dancing. I'm not quite sure how that worked, but apparently they loved it and had a really good time. So just keeping doing as much as you physically can for as long as you physically can is really important, to give something back to people who could really benefit from it. And for good reasons, are often spending even more time sedentary than the rest of us.
Yeah. So it's suitable for any age. And it's actually, we just talked about David Robson and the expectation effect. When reading his book, he started off with the example of a woman called Paddy Jones, who won Britain's, I think she was on all these Britain's Got Talent programs. She's 87, I think, and is an acrobatic salsa dancer. And when you see her partner, who's 40 years her junior, flinging her around and spinning around his head and stuff, you just think, actually, this idea that we associate age with fragility, don't we? But it doesn't need to be that way if we keep stimulating the body.
Yeah, I mean, there are things that go wrong with, even though, with the best of intentions. So my mum is a good example. She used to be a fitness instructor, trainer, sports masseur. She did that when they retired. And then she was sort of afflicted. She's got a cerebellum issue, atrophy, which affects her movement. And so, she gave me a real hard time when I was talking about movement, saying, well, it's all very well, Caroline, but I fall over and I can't do some of this stuff. But she does what she can. She uses her walker when she can. She put me to shame. We went shopping together to buy some hand weights. And I was picking up 2.5 kilos. And she was like, seriously? Give me the 5 kilos. And she was getting stuck in. She's got herself a little, a pair of like bike pedals that sits under her chair, and she sits there and does that. So, even when you sort of are largely immobile, there's stuff you can do, even if, I don't want to suggest that people who get frail, have dementia, have, other issues, haven't done it right, but it's kind of a keep as much as you can going, I think.
No, that's an important point. We don't want to cast blame or anything, and there are very real limits to the human body, but
and
we can work within those limits.
And I went to join in with a dance group for young people who have mental health issues, and one of the girls had chronic fatigue, and she also gave me a bit of a hard time and said, well, so you're saying that movement's important for intelligence. I'm intelligent. Just because I can't move doesn't mean I'm not intelligent. And I had to really think hard about how I presented things, because of course I wasn't saying that. But, she has found this this dance, when she does it, what she can, she rests when she has to. It has sort of opened up her life again. So it's a matter of sort of within the limits that life has dealt you, doing the best you can. Yeah.
Yeah, I have quite a few clients with fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue type conditions, and it can be very challenging. There's a great book actually by a woman called Geneva Lipton, who's she was a GP, but ended up suffering from fibromyalgia herself. But she's created a set of exercises for people with fibromyalgia that it's almost like taking them through a warm up for a warm up. So they're not diving straight into anything. They're just starting really slowly where they are and just trying to gently ease the body into just a little bit more movement than they maybe were able to do before. Yeah. Brilliant. I'm looking at the time. It's coming up to an hour. So I really appreciate you joining today. What's on the horizon for you work-wise? What's exciting you? Doesn't have to be interoception based. What's generally...
Well, I mean, so people keep asking me if I'm working on another book. And the truth is that it's so all-encompassing, writing a book. I've been thinking about this, researching, writing, talking about this for like 5 years or so. And to do that, you have to be really into it and really passionate about it. And so I'm not done with movement and body mind stuff yet. So I'm going to carry on keeping an eye on this research and writing about it and talking about it and being really boring about it. So I don't have another book sort of that I'm desperate to move on to, because I don't feel I'm finished with this one yet. I am keeping myself busy writing. So I said earlier, I'm writing about fascia. So that's another interesting thing that I did look at a bit in the book, but also I want to look more generally at this tissue that's not really well been studied and see how that affects body and mind. I'm hopefully going to be working on a different kind of book, which is for children. And it's sort of a science sort of encyclopedia for kids. That's sort of in the works. So yeah, I've got quite a short attention span unless I'm obsessed with something. So I tend to move, hop around doing lots of things, but I'm hoping that there's going to be more to do with movement, body, mind, interoception. This is really the stuff that gets me enthusiastic. And I'd quite like to do something to bring it into real life, to work with people who are working with people rather than sitting away in my room, typing away. And,
yeah,
I feel like it does have an impact from my little office, but there's a part of me that wants to go out and shout from the rooftops and make it happen in real life too. So I'm not quite sure what form that's going to take yet, but.
No, I feel very similar. I'm bringing together a group of researchers there's a small community actually who I've created some kind of training for improved interoception. But, they're mostly from the academic world. And I feel like, it provides so much evidence and a common language for all these other techniques that have been around for thousands of years or hundreds of years or developed in the last few decades. So I kind of feel like I want to shout about it from the rooftops, but it is finding that sort of, which I guess as a science communicator, that's your job, isn't it? To find that bridge between, the really latest techie stuff plus presenting it in a way that's going to appeal to people. So,
and I think there's, so I'm speaking to a couple of companies that are interested in telling their employees about it. And so I think it's not my natural audience, but getting the message out to the people that can make the change for people's working environments, I think is important, especially as we go into a new phase of work where people are starting to go back to the office, but they've had this freedom, and some people have used it to get more movement into their life, and how that we can keep the benefits of that going as we sort of transition back into a hopefully post-pandemic world. So we're not all stuck back in our boxes feeling miserable again, because that didn't work so well. So
no, not for many people.
I'll see what I can do.
Well, best of luck with that. Where can people find out more about your work and buy Move?
Well, Move is available everywhere books are sold. That's anywhere you can find it. Move. And I've got a website, it's carolinewilliams.net, and I'm on Instagram at CarolineWilliams_science, and on Twitter at ScienceCaroline. So
I'll link to them I'll link to those in the video description as well.
Fabulous.
Thanks so much, Caroline.
Well, thank you. It's been really nice talking to you. Thanks very much. I'm glad we managed to finally have a good old chat.
Yes. Yeah. So take care.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.